Bigger lobsters, eh? How does the lobster answer the phone? Shallow. All right, now I got that over with. Let's begin. All right. My slides up. Do I talk to myself? No. Okay. On a stormy afternoon in June of 1752, Benjamin Franklin rushed outside to fly a kite. With a metal key attached to a silk string, Franklin found incontrovertible proof that lightning was indeed an electrical phenomenon. Seeing the practicality of taming nature, just months later, Franklin invented the lightning rod. It's a slender piece of metal to put atop of rooftops to guide lightning safely to the ground. His invention immediately began saving lives. Those buildings which installed them no longer caught fire during a storm. But despite this obvious benefit, Franklin was dismayed that his invention was not more widely and readily accepted. Instead, lightning rods were met with prejudice and fear. People could see that lightning caused fires and struck people down, but they believed Franklin's unholy rod would be a cure or curse worse than the cure. Lightning was seen as a symbol of God's wrath, and it was considered impious and dangerous to interfere. If God's wrath was diverted with the lightning rod, he would surely strike out with a vengeance elsewhere. Representatives of the church spread fear about lightning rods thick on an unsure public, blaming them for earthquakes, for example. The preferred method for the church for protecting people from lightning was to send bell ringers up in a storm. The pealing of holy bells could stave off God, people thought. And of course, many bell ringers, often up in the highest tower in the town, lost their lives to lightning strikes. There were lawsuits filed neighbor against neighbor demanding that lightning rods be removed from houses. They were torn down from buildings across Europe and America by angry mobs. Even the Institute of Bologna, the most prestigious institute of science in Italy at the time, removed theirs because of public superstition. People believed that if lightning was God's will, interfering was morally wrong and would have dire consequences. May we place rods on our houses to guard them from lightning without being guilty of presumption. Presumption in this context means arrogance towards God. Franklin's group of trusted colleagues discussed this question because people would need an answer in order to be ready to use the lightning rod. St. Bride's Steeple in London was a frequent victim of lightning strikes, and when it was going to be repaired in 1768, 16 years after the invention of the lightning rod, it was going to be repaired without one. John Winthrop, professor of Harvard, wrote to Franklin about St. Bride's. He said, quote, "How astonishing is the force of prejudice in an age of so much knowledge and free inquiry," unquote. As Philip Dray, a Franklin biographer, put it, the lightning rod raised a question to the world that people were unsure to answer. Was it morally right for mankind to interfere with nature, or were we better and safer to accept the hand that providence deals, no matter how terrible? Is it morally right to interfere with nature? You might take a moment to consider yourself. Who would you be in that situation, in that story? Would you be the cleric preaching for precaution, non-interference, and ultimately death and destruction? Would you be a first adopter, anxious to get the facts and to ensure your family's safety? Would you be one of Franklin's men, demonstrating the rod's efficacy and safety and taking a stand against providence? Would you be one of the superstitious hordes? Given the knowledge and context that you would have at the time, would you be unsure what to do? What would convince you? Before our picture changes too much, I'd like to bring you back to the present day. We as modern men like to think of these scares as a thing of the past. After all, people aren't so religious anymore. Hopefully, there's many more atheists like me out there in the world. And we get science now, right? Even the most ignorant among us has access to a world of information brimming right at the tips of our fingertips. As much as that Harvard professor was right to be proud of his age, don't we have even more reason to be proud of our age of so much knowledge and free inquiry? Today, a story like this seems laughable. But before you say, ha ha ha, those silly colonists, you may want to consider whether you've really answered this question. Is it morally right to interfere with nature? Our frame of reference may have changed, but the same question is being asked of us today, and your answer matters. Since ideas influence the course of history, that means that how individual voices answer this question adds up to a culture. It determines the course of the future, and there's a lot of life-enhancing technology at stake. In this talk, I will talk about fossil fuels, one of those life-enhancing technologies. I think for most people today, the answer has been that it is morally wrong to interfere with nature. It's wrong to choose the betterment of individual human lives when bettering those lives comes up against leaving nature alone. And it always comes up against leaving nature alone. Just as you can't understand the reaction to the lightning rod without considering the morality behind it, I put it to you that you can't understand what's happening with carbon dioxide and fossil fuels without understanding that this is primarily a moral debate, not a scientific one. Our culture seems obsessed with carbon dioxide. It's categorized as a dangerous pollutant. The general consensus is that we should be using, quote, carbon-free sources of energy, such as solar or wind, no matter how expensive and inefficient and scarce those are. You can go online and calculate your carbon footprint. In other words, you can see how much carbon dioxide your activities create, such as driving to work, riding on airplanes, eating meat, even the size of your home. Businesses and individuals are all interested in reducing their carbon dioxide footprints. And when it comes to carbon footprints, the smaller, the better, we're told. In other words, the amount of carbon dioxide that you put into the atmosphere is a measure of your guilt. Your carbon footprint is your sin against nature. And we're told that Mother Nature will strike back with a vengeance. So consider carbon dioxide for a moment. With every breath you take, you exhale it. It's a waste product that arises from your life. And it's not just human beings that exhale carbon dioxide. Our machines do too. And human beings thrive to the extent that we live in a machine civilization versus one that's based on manual labor. So let's change our frame of reference. I'm an astronomer, and so I like to think of the Earth, or of our planet, from the outside looking in. Some who are looking for signs of intelligent life on other planets are looking for some of the gas products of a machine-based civilization, such as carbon dioxide, methane, chlorofluorocarbons. These could be signs of advanced forms of life, the same way that they would be signs to aliens looking through their telescopes out at us. On Earth, carbon dioxide is a sign of advanced life because human beings require, because human beings require energy in order to thrive. Energy allows a single man to do the work of many men. Earthman can do many such jobs in a single day. For example, I can cook breakfast, I can drive my children to school, I can wash clothes, I can transport groceries, all in the span of a single morning. I, of course, do other things. But I have 2 small children, and so modern conveniences that fossil fuels bring is often at the top of my mind. These machines all exhale carbon dioxide. Airplanes that take you to see family and friends or to educational conferences burn fossil fuels and release carbon dioxide as a byproduct. Tractors, combines, harvesters that bring plentiful food to our tables exhale carbon dioxide. The diggers and cranes that build our houses and indoor buildings exhale it. The factories that make your shoes and your iPhone exhale it. The lights that you flick on at your convenience so that you can work and play at night are likely fired by likely come from a coal-fired power plant that releases carbon dioxide as a byproduct into the atmosphere. These machines make our spectacular lives possible. They extend our lives. And in a way, they are extensions of our lives. In a way, they represent the breadth of our superhuman selves. But our use of them changes nature. Specifically, the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has risen from about 270 to 400 parts per million in the last 100 years. And the global average temperature has risen about a degree Celsius in the last 150 years or so. And human activity is responsible for likely most of that. We know also that fossil fuels make our lives better, incredibly better. So how do we judge whether this change in nature is good or bad? Environmentalists believe, and this is what I think is the prominent idea in the culture, that any change that we make to nature is evil. That's why, as Dr. Legates pointed out, the benefits of increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, such as warming and plant greening, are usually completely ignored. And even the giant mountain of gold benefits that burning fossil fuels bring to our lives is often met with a kind of indifference. So the most prominent idea when it comes to energy is that what makes an action good or evil is to the extent that it impacts nature. This is promulgated by prominent environmentalists. They believe that any human-induced change is bad. And for most people, this picture of the world resonates with them because they've accepted this moral premise that it is evil to change nature. And if you do, mankind will get his comeuppance. Ocean levels will rise, storms will rage, and we'll all burn up, as one prominent environmentalist, Bill McKibben, put it. I reject this moral picture, and not only, I reject it in two ways. One is scientifically. I don't think that the evidence bears this picture of the world out, but also I reject it morally, because I think that the standard of what we call good and evil should be the flourishing of individual human beings, their ability to live longer, safer, healthier, and happier lives. And by that standard, fossil fuels are an overwhelming positive, and humans are safer from the climate than ever before. In the last 30 years around the globe, people have increased the burning of fossil fuels by a factor of about 2 times. In China and India, that went up by a factor of 5. And this has led to a legendary improvement in people's lives. In China and India, for example, the average life expectancy has gone up by about 10 years. Igor Goklani has pointed out that death from climate, things like extreme heat, cold, floods, has gone down by 98% in the last 80 years or so. People are safer from the climate. They're better off, and they're better off to the extent that they have more cheap, reliable, plentiful energy. But it is important to be clear on the risks and benefits of technology, fossil fuels included. The greenhouse effect is real, and we need to consider carefully what effect the carbon dioxide has on our atmosphere because we care about individual human beings, about their prosperity and their safety. If it turned out that mankind was destroying our ability to thrive by burning fossil fuels, that would be a horrible tragedy. I don't think that's the case. But we need to think about the question and examine it for ourselves. Because what we're being asked to give up is huge. It's the life-saving and life-enhancing benefits of the cheap, reliable, and plentiful energy that fossil fuels represent. So even as I stand here on a panel on climate science, I hope to remind you of what it's all for. Because if we forget, debating about the effects of carbon dioxide, what the climate models do or don't show, how big or small lobsters are getting, is all going to be a giant waste of time. Benjamin Franklin and his men went around the world giving demonstrations of lightning rods, and perhaps more importantly, answering the moral question about whether lightning rods were impious interference with nature. People are motivated by morality. Part of the job of advocating for truth and reason in the climate change debate is engaging in the question of morality. Is it morally right to interfere with nature? Benjamin Franklin certainly had an answer to that, and he wrote and spoke about it. If you care about human beings, the answer when it comes to burning fossil fuels is yes. Fossil fuels power our spectacular lives, and it is moral to live those lives to the best and longest extent possible. The morality that says it's wrong to change or interfere with nature will come at the expense of human life. As an astronomer, I'm often asked what I think the future will be like. Will we burn fossil fuels for how long Will a better source of energy, an even better one, come along? All that I know for sure is that the future will be fantastic if capitalism survives, if we leave people free to innovate and to better their lives, and more importantly, encourage them to be proud to do so. Newton said, Isaac Newton, that he had seen further by standing on the shoulders of giants. And whereas our scientific knowledge in this day and age has made great strides forward, I think maybe our moral knowledge has not. It's time to step up and see further. I invite you to join me. Thank you very much.